I sat on the porch watching Lee chase fireflies in the yard, their tiny lights blinking like scattered stars in the growing dusk. The kid had been out there for the better part of an hour, running in circles with a mason jar clutched in his small hands. Every time he got close to catching one, he'd stumble, or the firefly would dart away at the last second. The sun was hanging low behind the ridge now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Pretty enough, I guess, but it meant the day was ending. And in these mountains, you didn't want to be caught outside after dark, not if you knew what was good for you. "Lee," I called out, "time to come in." He looked up from where he'd been crouched near the old oak tree, his brown hair sticking up in every direction. "Just 5 more minutes, Dad, please? Now, son." The tone in my voice must have told him I wasn't negotiating. He sighed the way only an 8-year-old could, like the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders, and trudged toward the porch. His sneakers scuffed against the wooden steps as he climbed up to where I sat. "I almost caught 3 of them," he said, holding up the empty jar. "They're fast. They're supposed to be fast. That's how they stay alive." Lee plopped down next to me on the porch swing, his legs too short to reach the ground. The chains creaked under our combined weight. "Why can't I stay out a little longer? It's not even really dark yet." I looked at him, this boy who had my eyes but his mother's stubborn streak, and felt that familiar tightness in my chest. He was so young, so trusting. He had no idea what lived in these mountains after the sun went down. "Because there are rules, Lee, and rules keep us safe." "What rules?" I stood up and pointed to the wooden plaque hanging above our front door. The wood was dark with age, carved by my grandfather's hands when I was younger than Lee was now. 4 simple lines, burned deep into the grain where time couldn't touch them. "Those rules," I said. Lee squinted up at the plaque. He could read well enough for his age, but the old-fashioned lettering made it harder. "Never go into the mountains alone," he read slowly. "Never go into the mountains at night. If you hear your name called from the trees, don't answer. If the fog comes down, get inside and lock the doors." He looked at me with those wide, curious eyes. "What do they mean, Dad?" I sat back down next to him, choosing my words carefully. "They mean exactly what they say." "But why? What's in the mountains?" "Things you don't need to worry about yet." "What kind of things?" Lee had that look on his face, the one that meant he wasn't going to let this go easy. He got that from his mother too, but some conversations couldn't happen yet. Some knowledge was too heavy for small shoulders. "You're too young to understand them yet, son. When you're older, I'll explain everything. For now, you just need to follow them. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, though I could see the question still bubbling behind his eyes. "Yes, sir." "Good boy. Now go wash up for dinner." Lee hopped down from the swing and headed inside, the screen door slamming behind him. I stayed on the porch a few minutes longer, watching the last of the daylight fade from the sky. The fireflies were still blinking in the yard, but they seemed dimmer now, more distant. The mountains rose up around our little valley like sleeping giants, their peaks lost in shadow. During the day, they looked peaceful enough, welcoming even. Tourists came from all over to hike the trails and take pictures of the views. But the tourists always left before dark, the smart ones anyway. I'd been born in these mountains, raised here, and I knew what they really were. Inside, I could hear Lee chattering to his grandmother Beverly about his failed firefly hunt. She was making her usual sympathetic sounds, probably already planning to help him try again tomorrow. Mom had moved in with us after Dad's heart attack 2 years ago. Said she wanted to help with Lee, but I think she just didn't want to be alone in the old house anymore. I couldn't blame her for that. The phone rang just as I was getting ready to head inside. It was sitting on the small table next to the front door, an old cordless that had seen better days. I almost didn't answer it. Calls after dark were rarely good news around here. but something made me pick it up. "Hello? Tommy? This is Sarah Chen, the new park ranger." I knew who she was. Hard to miss a new face in a town this small. She'd been working the trails for about 3 months now, still learning the lay of the land, still learning which places to avoid. "What can I do for you, Sarah?" Her voice sounded shaky, stressed. "I've found something today, something I think you need to know about." I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach. What kind of something? I was doing my evening rounds on Cedar Ridge. You know, the trail that leads up toward Widow's Peak? I knew it. Knew it better than I wanted to. "Yeah. Well, I found a backpack, an old one. Looked like it had been out there for years. But Tommy, there was something wrong about it." Cedar Ridge. The same trail where Timothy Adams had disappeared 19 years ago. Where search and rescue had combed every inch of forest and found nothing but his backpack hanging from a tree branch, like he'd just vanished into thin air. "What do you mean, wrong?" The backpack wasn't where it was supposed to be. I mean, I read all the old incident reports when I started this job. Timothy Adams, right? The kid who went missing back in 2004. 2005, I corrected automatically. Right, 2005. Well, according to the reports, they found his backpack hanging in a tree about a quarter-mile up the trail. Left it there as a memorial or something. But Tommy, that's not where I found it. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter. Where was it? On the ground. Just sitting there on the trail like someone had dropped it. And when I opened it up, her voice trailed off. "Sarah? What was in the backpack?" "Fresh stuff, Tommy. A water bottle that was still cold. Food wrappers that couldn't have been there more than a day or two. And a journal." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of journal?" "A composition book. The kind kids use in school. But the entries in it, they're dated from last week. And Tommy, they're signed with Timothy Adams's name." The porch seemed to tilt under my feet. Timothy had been my best friend since we were kids. We'd grown up together, learned to hunt and fish together, gotten into trouble together. And 19 years ago, he'd decided the old family rules were just superstition. He'd gone into the mountains alone at night, looking to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. They'd found his backpack the next morning. They'd never found Timothy. "Sarah, are you sure about this?" "I've got the journal right here. The handwriting looks like a teenager's, but the dates are definitely recent. And Tommy, there's something else." "What?" "The entries describe someone living up in the mountains, someone who's been watching things, watching houses." My blood went cold. "What houses?" "Yours, Tommy. The journal talks about watching the Ramos family cabin. It describes your son playing in the yard. It describes you sitting on the porch. I looked out at the darkening yard, at the tree line that seemed closer now than it had a few minutes ago. Somewhere in the house, Lee was laughing at something his grandmother had said. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But someone had been watching. Someone who knew Timothy's name. Someone who could write in his handwriting. "Sarah, where are you now?" "Back at the ranger station. I brought the backpack with me." "Tommy, what do you think this means?" I thought about Timothy, about the night he'd walked into those mountains and never walked back out. I thought about the old stories my grandfather had told me, about things that lived in the deep woods, things that could take shapes that weren't their own, things that could remember names and faces and use them for their own purposes. "I think it means someone's using Timothy's identity," I said. "And if they've been watching my family, that means we might be in danger." "Should I call the sheriff?" "Yeah, call Sheriff Morrison. Tell him what you found. But Sarah?" "Yeah? Don't go back up that trail. Not alone. Not at night. Not until we figure out what's going on." "Okay." "Tommy, are you going to be all right? Do you want me to send a deputy out to your place?" I looked through the screen door at Lee, who was now sitting at the kitchen table with a sandwich in front of him. He looked so small, so vulnerable. "Yeah," I said. "Send someone out. And Sarah, thanks for calling." I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment listening to the sounds of the night. The crickets were chirping in the grass. An owl called from somewhere in the distance. Normal sounds. But normal didn't mean safe. Not in these mountains. I left Lee with Beverly before dawn and drove the winding mountain road to the ranger station. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of pine trees and rocky outcroppings that looked different in the early morning hours. Everything felt sharper somehow, more dangerous. The ranger station sat at the base of Cedar Ridge, a small wooden building with green metal roofing and a covered porch. Sarah's truck was already there, parked under the security light that cast long shadows across the gravel lot. I pulled up next to it and killed the engine. Sarah opened the door before I could knock. She looked like she hadn't slept much. Her uniform was wrinkled and her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. The bags under her eyes told me she'd been thinking about what she'd found up there. "Thanks for coming," she said. "I've got everything laid out inside." The ranger station smelled like coffee and old wood. Maps covered one wall, marked with different colored pins, showing trail conditions and incident reports. A metal desk sat in the center of the room with the backpack spread open on top. Next to it was the composition book, open to show pages covered in handwriting. "There it is," Sarah said, pointing to the desk. "Timothy Adams's backpack. Found it yesterday evening around 6:30. I walked over and looked down at the bag. It was the same green canvas backpack Timothy had carried to school every day. The same frayed strap where his dog had chewed it when we were 12. The same faded patch from a band he'd liked in high school. But it looked too good, too clean for something that had been hanging in a tree for 19 years. "You said there were fresh items inside?" Sarah nodded and pointed to a water bottle sitting next to the backpack. "That bottle was cold when I found it, not room temperature. Cold, like someone had just finished drinking from it." She showed me the food wrappers. Granola bar packages with expiration dates from last month. A banana peel that was still yellow around the edges. An apple core that hadn't turned brown yet. "And then there's this," she said, picking up the composition book. I took it from her hands and looked at the cover. Timothy's name was written in black ink in the same handwriting I remembered from high school. The same way he'd always signed his name, with the T in Timothy bigger than the other letters. I opened to the first page and started reading. Day 1. Found a good spot to watch the cabin. The boy comes out to play around 4 every afternoon. Runs around the yard chasing bugs or throwing a ball. The man sits on the porch and watches him. Never takes his eyes off the kid. My hands went cold. That was exactly what happened every day. Lee came home from school, had a snack, then went outside to play while I sat on the porch swing and watched him. I flipped to the next page. Day 3. The boy likes to catch fireflies. Runs around with a mason jar trying to trap them. Never catches any but keeps trying. The man calls him inside when it gets dark. They follow the rules posted above the door. Jesus, I said under my breath. Keep reading, Sarah said. Day 5. The old woman is there most days. Gray hair, wears aprons. Cooks dinner and calls them in to eat. She watches the boy too when the man isn't around. They're careful with him. Protective. That was Beverly. Down to the aprons she always wore when she cooked. Day 7. Counted the windows on the cabin. 2 upstairs bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Kitchen and living room downstairs. Back door leads to a small deck. No fence around the property. Easy to approach from the tree line. I felt sick. Whoever wrote this had been watching us for a week, studying our house, learning our routines. The handwriting, I said. It looks exactly like Timothy's. That's what's bothering me, Sarah said. I compared it to some old incident reports from when Timothy went missing. The signatures match perfectly. She pulled out a manila folder and showed me a missing person report from 2005. Timothy's signature was at the bottom where he'd signed a liability waiver for a school hiking trip 2 weeks before he disappeared. The handwriting was identical. But Timothy's been gone for 19 years, I said. I know. That's why I called you. I set the journal down and looked at her. You said you found other things. Markings on trees? Yeah. Come look at this. Sarah walked over to her desk and pulled out a digital camera. She scrolled through the photos until she found what she was looking for. I took these pictures of the trees around where I found the backpack, she said, handing me the camera. The first photo showed a pine tree with symbols carved into the bark. They weren't letters or numbers. They looked like scratches at first glance, but when I looked closer, I could see they were deliberate, purposeful. 3 parallel lines with a circle above them, a triangle with a line through the middle, something that looked like an X but with curved edges. There were more, Sarah said, clicking to the next photo. At least 6 trees had these markings, all within 50 feet of where the backpack was. I stared at the symbols and felt something cold settle in my stomach. I'd seen markings like these before. Not exactly the same, but similar. My grandfather had shown me some when I was about Lee's age. These aren't trail markers, I said. I know, I checked all the official marking systems. These don't match anything the Park Service uses. They're not graffiti either. No, too precise, too organized. I handed the camera back to her. My grandfather used to tell me stories about markings like these. Said they were territorial markers. Territorial markers for what? Things that weren't entirely human. Sarah stared at me. You're serious. Dead serious. He said some of the old families in these mountains knew about them, knew what they meant. But most of that knowledge died with the people who remembered. What did they mark territory for? I thought about Jake, about the way he'd come back from the fog with empty eyes and a mind that had been hollowed out, about Timothy disappearing after he went into the mountains to prove the rules were just superstition. Things that hunt, I said. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she walked over to the window and looked out at the mountains. The sun was starting to come up behind the ridgeline, painting the sky a pale orange. I want to go back up there, she said, to where I found the backpack. See if there's anything else. No. We have plenty of daylight. It's not even 7 in the morning. Doesn't matter. The rules say never go into the mountains alone. I wouldn't be alone. You'd be with me. I shook my head. Those rules exist for a reason. My family's been following them for generations. But if someone's watching your family, then we handle it the right way. We call the sheriff. We let trained professionals deal with it. Sarah turned away from the window. I am a trained professional. Not for this. For what? Some mountain superstition? Before I could answer, she pointed out the window. Look at that. I walked over and looked where she was pointing. Fog was rolling in from the ridgeline, thick gray fog that moved like water down the mountainside. Weather Service said clear skies all day, Sarah said. I watched the fog move. It wasn't following the natural flow of the terrain. It was moving against the wind, flowing uphill in places where it should have been flowing down. That's not natural fog, I said. What do you mean? The fog reached the tree line and kept coming. It moved too fast and too purposeful, like it was looking for something. Get away from the window. Tommy, get away from the window, now. Sarah stepped back. The fog was halfway down the mountainside and moving faster. I could see it swirling around the trees, wrapping around them like fingers. What's happening? Sarah asked. I thought about Jake again. About the day he'd gone into the mountains to help search for a missing hiker and come back 3 days later with his mind gone. Beverly said he'd been talking about the fog for weeks before it happened, said he'd seen it moving wrong, moving like it was alive. Same thing that happened to my uncle, I said. The fog reached the bottom of the mountain and started across the clearing toward the ranger station. It moved in a straight line, ignoring the wind completely. We need to get inside, I said. We are inside. I mean, really inside. Lock the doors, close the blinds, don't look at it. That's crazy. The fog hit the building. One moment I could see the parking lot and our trucks. The next moment, everything outside the window was gray. I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her away from the window. I pulled Sarah further from the window and kept my hand on her arm. The fog pressed against the glass like it was trying to get in. "What do we do now?" Sarah whispered. "We wait. Don't look outside. Don't make noise. This is insane. Fog doesn't behave like this." I turned to face her. She needed to understand what we were dealing with. My Uncle Jake went into that fog 3 years ago. He was a park ranger too, 28 years old, built like a truck, trained by the army, tough as they come. Sarah crossed her arms. "What happened to him?" "He came back the next morning, walked right up to our front door and knocked, but something was wrong." I moved away from the window and sat down in one of the metal chairs. Jake wouldn't talk, wouldn't eat, just sat there staring at nothing. Maybe he was in shock. For 3 years, he's still like that. Lives with my grandfather now. Sits in a chair by the window all day. Never says a word, never reacts to anything. It's like someone took Jake and left behind an empty shell. Sarah shook her head. There has to be a medical explanation. Trauma, maybe a head injury. We took him to doctors, 3 different ones. They couldn't find anything wrong with him physically. Brain scans came back normal. But his eyes... I rubbed my face with both hands. His eyes are empty, like nobody's home anymore. The fog thickened outside. I couldn't see the parking lot at all now. Everything beyond the windows was solid gray. My grandfather said Jake broke the rules, went into the mountains alone during a fog bank just like this one. He was trying to help some hikers who got lost. That's his job. Not in the fog. Never in the fog. Sarah walked over to her desk and picked up the radio. There's got to be a rational explanation for all this. Fog is just water vapor. It can't hurt people. Before I could answer, we heard footsteps outside. Heavy steps. Slow and deliberate. They circled around the building from left to right, starting at the front door and moving along the wall. Sarah froze with the radio halfway to her mouth. We both listened. The footsteps were too far apart. Each step sounded like it covered more ground than a normal person could manage, and they were heavy. Not just the weight of someone walking, but heavy like something massive pressing down on the earth. The steps paused at the first window, then continued. "Someone's out there," Sarah whispered. "No, someone isn't." The footsteps reached the back corner of the building, paused again, then continued along the rear wall. Sarah moved toward the back window, but I grabbed her wrist. "Don't look. We need to see what's out there." "No, we don't." The footsteps reached the second back window. Another pause. I counted to 10 before they started moving again. "It's checking each window," Sarah said. "I know. Like it's looking for something. It's looking for us." The footsteps moved along the side wall now, getting closer to where we stood. Sarah backed away from the window and bumped into her desk. The composition book fell to the floor. The footsteps stopped. We both held our breath. 30 seconds passed. A full minute. Then the footsteps started again, slower now, more careful. Sarah picked up the radio and pressed the talk button. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Chen at Cedar Ridge Station. I need backup immediately." Static filled the speaker. But underneath the static, something else. Voices, whispers. Sarah adjusted the frequency. "Dispatch, do you copy?" More static. The whispers got louder. Not English, not Spanish, not any language I recognized. The words sounded wrong, like they were coming from throats that weren't built for human speech. "What the hell is that?" Sarah turned down the volume. "Turn it off." She clicked the radio off, but we could still hear the whispers. Faint now, but coming from outside. Multiple voices, all whispering in that same strange language. The footsteps had stopped, but the whispers continued, circling the building like the footsteps had. Sarah sat down hard in her chair. This isn't possible. My grandfather told me stories about things that live in the mountains, things that hunt. You're talking about monsters. I'm talking about things we don't understand, things that follow rules we don't know about. The whispers faded, then stopped completely. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. I checked my watch. 7:30, then 8:15, 8:45. Sarah tried the radio twice more. Both times we got static and whispers. She gave up and put the radio back on the desk. "How long does this last?" she asked. "I don't know. Jake never told us what happened to him. Because he can't talk." "Because he won't talk. There's a difference." 9:30, 10:15, 10:45. My legs were getting stiff from sitting in the metal chair. Sarah had moved to the floor and was leaning against the wall with her eyes closed. She wasn't sleeping, just trying to stay calm. 11:20, 11:55. At midnight, the whispers started again, closer this time, right outside the windows. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at me. "Don't listen to what they're saying," I told her. "I can't understand it anyway." "Good. Keep it that way." The whispers moved around the building 3 times, then stopped. 12:30, 1:15, 1:45. At 2 in the morning, everything went quiet. Not just the whispers and footsteps, everything. No wind, no insects, no normal night sounds at all. "Something's changed," Sarah whispered. I nodded. The silence felt different, heavier. 2:30, 3 o'clock, 3:15. At 3:30, the fog started to lift. It happened fast. 1 minute the windows were solid gray. The next minute I could see shapes outside. The parking lot, our trucks, the tree line. "It's clearing," Sarah said. She started to get up, but I held up my hand. "Wait." The fog pulled back like a curtain being drawn. In 5 minutes it was completely gone. The night was clear and still, stars visible overhead. But something was standing at the tree line. A figure in hiking clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, hiking boots, a baseball cap. The figure raised one hand and waved at the window. "Jesus Christ," Sarah breathed. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the face clearly. Timothy Adams, same blonde hair, same smile, same way of standing with his weight on his left foot. But his eyes reflected the light from the building, bright and yellow, like an animal's. "That's not possible," Sarah said. Timothy waved again, then pointed at the building, at us. Sarah grabbed the binoculars from her desk and focused them on the tree line. "What do you see?" "It's him. It looks exactly like him." Her voice was shaking. "But his eyes, they're not right." "What about his clothes?" "Same as in the missing person photos. Same flannel shirt, same jeans, even the same baseball cap." Timothy turned and walked back into the trees. In 3 steps, he was gone. Sarah lowered the binoculars and set them on the desk. Her hands were trembling. "There's something else," she said. "What?" "Something I didn't tell you before." She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out another composition book. This one had a black cover instead of the blue one we'd been looking at. "I found this near Timothy's backpack, hidden under some leaves." She handed me the book. The name on the front was written in different handwriting, block letters instead of cursive. Jake Ramos. "This is my uncle's." "I know. I recognize the name from the missing person reports." I opened the book. The pages were filled with Jake's careful handwriting, military neat letters in straight lines. "When did he write this?" "Check the dates." I flipped to the first page. The date at the top was from 3 years ago, 2 days before Jake came back empty. I read the first entry out loud. "Day 1 of patrol, Fog moving in from the North Ridge. Heavier than usual. Hikers reported missing near Widow's Peak. Going to investigate. I turned the page. Day 2. Found their campsite. Tents still up but nobody inside. Food still warm, like they just vanished. Fog getting thicker. The third entry was shorter. Day 3. Something's wrong with this fog. It follows me, moves against the wind. Heard voices calling my name from the trees. Didn't answer. Remember the rules. I flipped to the last page. The final entry was written in shaky handwriting, like Jake's hand was trembling. If anyone finds this, stay away from the mountains. Something lives up there, something that collects people who break the rules. It takes their faces, their voices, their memories. It wears them like clothes. Timothy Adams has been dead for 19 years, but something is still using his name. The entry ended there. But at the bottom of the page, Jake had written one more line in letters so faint, I could barely read them. It's coming for the boy next. I opened Jake's journal while Sarah backed her truck out of the ranger station parking lot. The black composition book felt heavier than it should have, like it was full of more than just words. Stay on the main roads, I said without looking up from the pages. Don't take any shortcuts through the trails. Sarah nodded and turned left onto Route 19, heading back toward town. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead of us, and I could see her hands gripping the steering wheel tight. The first entry I hadn't read yet was dated 3 months before Jake's encounter with the fog. His handwriting looked normal here, still neat and controlled like the military had taught him. March 15th. Found another missing person report today. Rebecca Martinez, age 23, disappeared 6 months ago near Willow Creek Trail. That makes 4 people in 2 years. Sheriff Morrison says they probably just got lost or decided to start over somewhere else, but something doesn't add up. I turned the page. Sarah kept her eyes on the road, but I could tell she was listening. March 20th. Talked to Rebecca's sister today. She said Rebecca called her the night before she disappeared, scared about something she'd seen on the trail. Rebecca told her sister there was a man following her, but when she turned around to confront him, it was her own brother Miguel. Problem is, Miguel was in Phoenix that whole week for work. His sister has the plane tickets to prove it. What's it say? Sarah asked. Jake was investigating disappearances, people going missing near the trails. I kept reading, but it's more than that. March 22nd. Miguel Martinez came to see me today. He's been having dreams about his sister Rebecca calling for help from somewhere in the mountains. Says the dreams feel real, like memories. But here's the thing that bothers me. Miguel described terrain he's never seen before. Caves near Widow's Peak that aren't on any of our maps. The truck hit a pothole, and I had to steady the journal against my knee. Sarah muttered an apology and slowed down a bit. April 1st. Found something today that changes everything. Hikers reported seeing Rebecca Martinez on Cedar Ridge Trail yesterday. Problem is, Rebecca's been missing for 7 months. I went up there myself to check it out. Found footprints that matched the boots Rebecca was wearing when she disappeared. Fresh prints, maybe 2 days old. My stomach started to feel cold. I'd thought Jake lost his mind because of what he saw in the fog, but this showed he'd been seeing impossible things for months before that. April 3rd. Saw her myself today. Rebecca Martinez walking the trail near Devil's Bend like nothing ever happened. Same clothes, same backpack, same everything. I called out to her and she turned around and waved. Looked exactly like the photos her family gave us. But something was wrong with her eyes. They reflected light like an animal's. Sarah glanced over at me. Tommy, you okay? Keep driving, I said. My voice sounded strange even to me. April 5th. Did some research at the library. Found newspaper clippings going back 60 years. People have been disappearing in these mountains for decades. But here's what's interesting. Sometimes they come back. or something that looks like them comes back. Mrs. Henderson from town told me her husband came home 3 days after he went missing in 1978. Said he seemed different after that, quieter, like he was always listening for something. He lived another 10 years, but she swears it wasn't really him. I turned several pages, scanning through entries about strange sightings and reports of people acting wrong after coming back from the mountains. Jake had been building a case, documenting everything. April 20th. Found the campsite today, hidden in a ravine about 2 miles past Widow's Peak. Someone's been living up there for a long time. Months, maybe years. Found clothes that belonged to different missing people. Rebecca's jacket, Timothy Adams's old hiking boots. A dozen other items I recognized from missing person reports. Sarah's headlights swept across a road sign, town limits 5 miles. April 22nd. It's not just taking people, it's studying them. Found notebooks at the campsite filled with observations about human behavior, how people walk, talk, react to different situations, like something was learning to be human by watching us. The handwriting started to get messier here, like Jake was writing faster or his hands were shaking. April 25th. Saw Timothy Adams today. Not someone who looks like Timothy. It was him. Same face, same voice, same laugh. He was sitting on a rock near Willow Creek, eating an apple and reading a book like he was just out for a casual hike. When he saw me, he smiled and waved. Said, "Hey Jake, beautiful day, isn't it?" in Timothy's exact voice. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran back to my truck and drove straight home. Jesus, Sarah whispered. April 27th. Did more research. Found records of similar disappearances in other mountain regions. Colorado, Montana, West Virginia. Always the same pattern. People vanish, then sometimes come back acting strange. The old-timers in those places have rules too, just like Grandpa's rules. Different words, same ideas. Don't go alone. Don't go at night. Don't answer when something calls your name. I was starting to understand what had driven Jake to go into those mountains, despite knowing the rules. He'd been a soldier, trained to fight enemies he could see and understand. But this was something else entirely. May 1st. It's been watching the town. I've seen it 3 times this week, always wearing a different face. Rebecca Martinez at the grocery store. Timothy Adams at the gas station. Yesterday I saw it wearing the face of old Mr. Peterson, who died last winter. It looked right at me and smiled. May 3rd. I think it knows I've been investigating. Found my truck's tires slashed this morning. No one else on my street had any problems. The entries stopped for almost 2 weeks. When they picked up again, Jake's handwriting had changed. Still neat, but you could see the stress in the way he pressed the pen into the paper. May 15th. It's escalating. People in town are starting to act strange. Mrs. Chen mentioned seeing her dead mother walking past her house last night. Tom Bradley swears his missing brother called him on the phone, but his brother disappeared 15 years ago. Sarah went rigid. Did he just say Chen? I looked at the entry again. Mrs. Chen, you related to anyone by that name around here? My grandmother. She died 2 years ago. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. But my mom mentioned something about Grandma acting weird before she passed. Said she kept talking about seeing people who weren't there. I kept reading, but now every word felt like a weight in my chest. May 18th. Found more evidence at the campsite. Photos of people in town, taken from a distance. It's been watching us for months, maybe years, learning our routines, our relationships, our habits. There are photos of the Ramos family going back to when Tommy was a teenager. My hand started shaking. Jake had known we were being watched long before Timothy's backpack showed up. May 20th. Last entry before I have to do something about this. The fog's been coming down more often lately, and every time it does, more people report seeing things that shouldn't be there. Dead relatives, missing friends, impossible faces in impossible places. Whatever's up in those mountains isn't just taking people anymore. It's preparing for something bigger. The final entries were the ones Sarah had already read to me, leading up to Jake's encounter with the fog and his warning about it coming for Lee. I closed the journal and looked out the windshield. We were almost back to town, the lights getting brighter ahead of us. "Tommy," Sarah said, "if Jake was right about all this, if something's been living up there for years learning to be human, then what's it planning to do?" Before I could answer, Sarah hit the brakes hard. The truck lurched to a stop, and I had to brace myself against the dashboard. "What the hell?" I said. Sarah pointed ahead. "Look." About 50 yards down the road, right at Devil's Bend where the guardrail curved around the steep drop-off, a woman stood beside the road. She wore a red dress that looked bright even in our headlights, and she was facing away from us, looking out over the valley. My blood went cold. "Don't stop the truck." "But she might be hurt. What's someone doing out here alone at this hour?" The woman turned toward our headlights. Even from this distance, I could see she was waving at us, gesturing for us to pull over. "Sarah, do not stop this truck." But Sarah was already letting off the brake, letting the truck roll forward slowly. "She might need help. We can't just drive past someone who might be in trouble." I grabbed the steering wheel. My father told me about this exact thing. A woman in a red dress at Devil's Bend. He saw her 40 years ago. Sarah tried to pull the wheel back, but I held it steady. "That's impossible. It can't be the same person." "Look at her, Sarah. Really look." We were close enough now that our headlights lit up the woman clearly. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, olive skin, and she was wearing a park ranger uniform under the red dress. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with a familiar face. Sarah gasped and hit the brakes again. "That's impossible." The woman in the red dress had Sarah's face. Not similar to Sarah's face, it was exactly Sarah's face, but older somehow, like it had been aged and corrupted. The eyes were wrong, too, reflecting our headlights with that same unnatural yellow glow I'd seen on the Timothy thing at the tree line. "Drive," I said. "Drive right now." Sarah stared at her own face, looking back at her from the side of the road. The red-dressed version of herself smiled and waved again, more insistently this time. "I said drive." I yanked the steering wheel hard to the left and stomped my foot down on top of Sarah's foot where it rested on the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward and swerved around the woman. As we passed her, I got a clear look at her face through the passenger window. It was definitely Sarah's face, but wrong in ways I couldn't explain. The smile was too wide, the eyes too bright, and there was something predatory about the way she watched us pass. In the side mirror, I watched the red-dressed Sarah thing raise her hand and wave goodbye, that terrible smile never leaving her face. Sarah was hyperventilating. That was me. That was my face. How is that possible? I kept my eyes on the side mirror until the woman disappeared around the bend behind us. "It doesn't just take people," I said. "It makes copies of them. Twisted versions. My father was right. It uses them as bait. But I'm right here. I'm still me." "Yeah, you are, which means whatever's in those mountains doesn't need the original to make a copy." I looked at Sarah, who was gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. "It just needs to study you long enough to get the details right." The implications of that hit both of us at the same time. If it could make a copy of Sarah without taking her, then it could make a copy of anyone, including Lee. I grabbed the steering wheel tighter. "Drive straight to my cabin. Don't stop for anything." Sarah's hands shook as she turned onto Maple Ridge Road. What if there are more of them? There probably are. I kept watching the mirrors. The road behind us stayed empty, but that didn't mean much. Just get us home. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as we climbed toward my place. Sarah took the curves too fast, but I didn't tell her to slow down. Every minute counted now. My cabin came into view around the final bend. The porch light was on, like always, but something was wrong. The front door stood wide open, and I could see Beverly's legs stretched across the porch boards. "Stop here." I was out of the truck before Sarah finished braking. Beverly lay on her side near the porch steps, breathing but unconscious. I knelt beside her and checked for injuries. No blood, no obvious wounds. Her pulse felt steady under my fingers. "Beverly." I shook her shoulder gently. "Beverly, wake up." Her eyes fluttered open. She looked confused for a moment, then focused on my face. "Tommy?" She tried to sit up. "Oh, thank goodness you're back." I helped her into a sitting position against the porch railing. "What happened? Where's Lee?" "He's with Timothy." Beverly rubbed her forehead. "That nice boy came by about an hour ago. Said you'd sent him to pick up Lee for a surprise camping trip." My blood went cold. "What boy?" "Timothy Adams. You remember Timothy, don't you? Your friend from school." Beverly smiled like nothing was wrong. "He's grown up so handsome. Still has that blonde hair and those bright eyes." Sarah made a choking sound behind me. I kept my voice calm. "Tell me exactly what happened." "Well, Timothy knocked on the door around 9:30. Said you'd called him and asked him to come get Lee for a special overnight trip. Some kind of surprise you'd been planning." Beverly's voice carried that pleased tone she used when she thought I was doing something nice for Lee. "I told him I hadn't heard anything about it, but he showed me the note you left." "What note?" "The one in your handwriting. Timothy said you'd given it to him in case I had questions." Beverly looked confused by my reaction. "It was definitely your writing, Tommy. You know how careful you are with your letters." I felt sick. "Where's the note now?" "Timothy took it with him when they left. Said he needed to keep it in case anyone asked questions." Beverly struggled to stand, so I helped her up. "I tried to call Lee back when they were walking to the truck, but I must have fainted. I've been feeling dizzy all evening." Sarah stepped closer. "What exactly did Timothy tell you?" Beverly looked at Sarah with mild curiosity. "Oh, you must be the new park ranger. Timothy mentioned you'd be helping with the camping trip." She turned back to me. "He knew so much about your childhood, Tommy. Remember that time you and he built the tree fort behind the old Miller place? And how you two used to catch crawdads in Wilson Creek every summer? He even knew about the scar you got on your knee when you fell off his bike. Those were real memories. Things only Timothy would know. But Timothy had been dead for 19 years. Did he say where they were going?" "Up to the old camping spot near your grandfather's place. Said you wanted to show Lee where you used to go as a boy." Beverly smiled again. "It's sweet that you're sharing those memories with him." I closed my eyes for a second. The old camping spot was past Jose's homestead, deep in the mountains where the logging trails ended. Exactly where something would take a child if it wanted to lure family members into the woods. "How long ago did they leave?" "Oh, maybe 20 minutes. Lee was so excited. He ran inside to pack his sleeping bag and that little flashlight you got him for Christmas." Beverly's expression shifted to concern. "Tommy, you look upset. Did I do something wrong?" "No." I squeezed her hand. "You did exactly what anyone would do. It's not your fault." Sarah was already walking around the cabin's perimeter with her flashlight. I could see the beam moving across the ground near the tree line. "Beverly, I need you to go inside and lock all the doors. Don't open them for anyone until I get back." "But where are you going? Timothy said you'd be along shortly." "I'm going to find Lee." I helped her toward the front door. "Promise me you'll stay inside no matter what you hear, even if someone knocks and says they're me." Beverly stopped walking. "Tommy, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared." I got her to the doorway. "Lock this behind me and don't come out until morning." Sarah called from behind the cabin. "Tommy, you need to see this." I made sure Beverly was safely inside before joining Sarah. She stood near the edge of my property where the mowed grass met the wild forest. Her flashlight beam illuminated the ground at her feet. Look at these prints. The footprints were clear in the soft earth. 2 sets. One small pair that had to be Lee's sneakers, and one larger set that looked like hiking boots. But something was wrong with the adult prints. They were too deep, like whoever made them weighed much more than they should, and the spacing between steps was too long. They head toward the old trail. Sarah followed the prints with her light. This goes to your grandfather's place, right? Yeah. I studied the tracks. Lee's prints looked normal, the excited, hurried steps of an 8-year-old boy. But the other set bothered me. They were perfectly placed, like whoever made them was thinking carefully about each step. We followed the trail into the woods. My flashlight beam picked up broken twigs and disturbed leaves where 2 people had passed recently. The path wound uphill through thick pine and oak, following the route I'd walked countless times as a child. How far is it? Sarah whispered. About 2 miles to José's old cabin. The camping spot is another mile past that. I kept my voice low. We should catch up to them soon. Lee's got short legs. But even as I said it, I knew something was wrong. Lee was a fast walker for his age, but not fast enough to stay ahead of us for this long. Either they were moving much quicker than an 8-year-old should be able to manage, or they'd taken a different route. The trail curved around a massive oak tree that had been there since I was Lee's age. Past the tree, the path split into 2 branches. The main trail continued uphill toward José's place. The other branch, barely visible now after years of disuse, led deeper into the mountains toward Widow's Peak. I stopped walking. In the soft dirt where the trails diverged, the footprints turned toward Widow's Peak. They didn't go to the camping spot. I played my light over the ground to make sure. They're heading for the old mining area. Sarah checked her own flashlight beam. Why would Timothy take Lee that way? Because Timothy's dead. I started following the prints down the narrow trail, and whatever's wearing his face doesn't care about camping. The path to Widow's Peak was rougher than the main trail. Fallen logs blocked sections, and thick undergrowth crowded both sides. I had to duck under low branches and step carefully over hidden roots. This wasn't a trail for an 8-year-old boy. But the footprints continued, clear as before. Lee's small sneaker prints and those 2 deep boot marks side by side on the forest floor. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I heard it. A low, musical whistle drifted through the trees ahead of us. 3 notes, rising and falling in a pattern that sounded almost like a song. It was beautiful and haunting, the kind of melody that made you want to stop and listen. Sarah froze beside me. What was that? Don't answer it. I grabbed her arm. Whatever you do, don't whistle back. The sound came again, closer this time. The same 3 notes, but with variations now, more complex, like someone was elaborating on the basic tune. It's beautiful. Sarah's voice sounded dreamy. It sounds like... Like what? Like my grandmother used to hum when I was little. Sarah took a step toward the sound. She had this lullaby she'd sing when I couldn't sleep. I pulled her back. That's not your grandmother. The whistling changed again. Now it was a full melody, rich and complex, with harmonies that seemed to come from multiple directions. It was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard, and every instinct I had told me to follow it deeper into the woods. Sarah started to pucker her lips. No! I clamped my hand over her mouth. Don't you dare! She struggled against me for a moment, then her eyes cleared. Oh God. I was going to whistle back. Yeah, you were. I kept my hand on her arm. That's what it wants. The melody continued, weaving through the trees around us. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from ahead, sometimes from behind. The harmonies made it impossible to pinpoint the source. What is it? The same thing that killed my great-grandfather. I started walking again, following Lee's footprints. Jacob heard whistling in these woods 60 years ago. They found him 3 days later at Widow's Peak, dead but not a mark on him. The whistling grew more insistent, more beautiful. It was pulling at something deep in my chest, making me want to stop walking and just listen, making me want to call back. "Tommy." Sarah's voice was strained. "I can barely fight it." I know. I was struggling too. The melody seemed to bypass my conscious mind and speak directly to some primitive part of my brain. Just keep walking. Focus on Lee. But the whistling was getting stronger. And now I could hear something else underneath the music. A child's laughter. High and delighted like Lee when he was playing his favorite game. "Lee?" I called out before I could stop myself. The whistling stopped instantly. The forest went completely silent. Sarah grabbed my shoulder. "Why did you do that?" I heard Lee laughing. I listened for any sound, but the woods had gone dead quiet. No insects, no wind, no night birds. Just the kind of unnatural silence that meant something was very wrong. Then the whistling started again, but now it was coming from 3 different directions at once, surrounding us. The melodies intertwined and separated, creating harmonies that were impossible for any human throat to produce. "It's calling more of them." I pulled Sarah forward along the trail. "We have to move faster." The footprints were still clear in our flashlight beams, still heading toward Widow's Peak. But now I noticed something else. Lee's prints were getting deeper, like he was carrying extra weight, or like something was pressing down on him from above. "Tommy, look at this." Sarah stopped beside a large pine tree. There are marks on the bark. I examined the tree trunk with my flashlight. Fresh scratches gouged the bark about 7 feet off the ground. 4 parallel lines, too long and too deep to be made by any animal I knew. They looked like claw marks, but whatever made them had to be huge. "How long has this thing been in these mountains?" Sarah asked. "Longer than my family's been here." I kept following the trail. Jose used to say the rules came from his grandfather, and his grandfather's grandfather before that. It's been here for generations, learning about us, studying us. The whistling changed again. Now it sounded like multiple voices calling in harmony. Not quite human voices, but close enough to be unsettling. And underneath it all, I could still hear that child's laughter. It's been building toward this for 19 years. I realized the truth as I said it. Ever since it took Timothy, it's been watching my family, learning about us, waiting for the right moment. What moment? To get Lee. The path started sloping upward more steeply. Lee's the next generation. If it takes him, it gets all our family memories, all our knowledge of the rules, everything we know about how to stay safe. Sarah stumbled over a root but caught herself. "Why Lee specifically?" "Because he's young enough to be completely molded. And because..." I paused as the full horror of it hit me. "Because it can use him to get close to other families, other children. Parents trust kids more than adults." The whistling stopped again. In the sudden silence, I heard footsteps ahead of us on the trail. Light, quick steps that could belong to an 8-year-old boy. "Lee," I called out again, unable to stop myself. "Daddy?" Lee's voice drifted back through the trees. "Daddy, where are you? I'm scared." Every parental instinct I had screamed at me to run toward that voice, to find my son and protect him. But something about the way he said "daddy" was wrong. Lee had called me dad since he was 5. He never used daddy anymore. Sarah started forward. "That's him, right? That's Lee?" I caught her arm. "Lee doesn't call me daddy." "Daddy, please help me." The voice came again, high and frightened. "Timothy left me here and I can't find the trail." It sounded exactly like Lee. Same pitch, same accent, same slight lisp on the S sounds. but it was wrong. It's using his voice. I forced myself to stay still, just like it used Timothy's face. But what if it really is him? Sarah pulled against my grip. What if he got away and he's lost? Daddy! The voice was closer now, maybe 50 yards ahead. I see your flashlight. I'm coming. I heard running footsteps crashing through the underbrush toward us, getting closer fast. We have to go. I turned and started back down the trail, pulling Sarah with me. Now! But if it's really Lee... It's not. I broke into a jog, dragging her along. Lee knows these woods. He wouldn't run toward lights. He'd hide and wait to be sure it was really me. Behind us, the footsteps stopped. The forest went quiet again. Then the whistling resumed, but now it was angry, discordant. The beautiful melody had become something harsh and demanding. Daddy, why are you running away? Lee's voice called after us, but there was something cold in it now, something that made my skin crawl. Don't you want to find me? We reached the trail junction where the path split. I stopped to catch my breath and figure out our next move. We can't just leave him. Sarah was breathing hard. If there's any chance that's really Lee... There isn't. I checked my watch, 10:15. But you're right, we can't leave him. We just can't go charging in blind. The whistling was coming from multiple directions again, and now I could hear other voices mixed in with it. Adult voices, calling our names. Tommy! It was Timothy's voice, bright and cheerful like when we were kids. Come on, man, Lee's fine. We're just having some fun. Sarah! Another voice, older and female. Sarah, honey, it's Grandma. I've been waiting for you. Sarah made a choking sound. That's her voice. That's my grandmother's voice. Tommy, where are you? This voice I recognized, too. It was my father, Louis, calling like he used to when I stayed out too late as a child. Your boy's up here with us. He wants to see you. The voices were getting closer, and with them came the sound of footsteps, multiple sets moving through the woods toward our position. How many of them are there? Sarah whispered. I don't know. I checked the trail behind us, but we're about to find out. The footsteps stopped just beyond the range of our flashlights. I could sense them out there in the darkness, watching us, waiting. Tommy. Timothy's voice again, but closer now. Remember what we used to say. Friends don't leave friends behind. That's right. My father's voice, warm and caring. Family takes care of family. Come home, Sarah. Her grandmother's voice, sweet and loving. Come home to Grandma. They were using everything they knew about us, every emotional connection, every memory that might make us vulnerable. We have to get back to town. I started down the main trail toward Jose's place. Get help. What about Lee? We'll come back. I hoped I was making the right choice, but not alone, and not at night. The voices followed us as we walked, always just out of sight, but close enough to be heard clearly. Don't go, Tommy. Timothy sounded hurt now. I thought we were friends. Lee's asking for you. My father's voice carried disappointment. He doesn't understand why you won't come. I'm all alone up here, Sarah. Her grandmother sounded sad and frail, just like I was when I died. Sarah was crying now, but she kept walking. I knew how hard it was. Those voices were designed to break us down, to make us turn around and walk back into whatever trap was waiting. The trail curved around the big oak tree. Behind us, the voices grew fainter but didn't stop entirely. We'll be waiting, Timothy called out. We'll always be waiting. Then the forest went quiet again. Normal quiet this time, with insects and wind and the distant call of an owl. But I knew they were still out there. And I knew they had Lee. What do we do now? Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I looked up through the trees. The sky was starting to show the first faint hint of dawn, but we still had hours until sunrise. We get help, we get weapons, and we go back before sunset tomorrow. I started walking faster toward the cabin, because once darkness falls again, the rules won't be enough to protect any of us. I forced myself to keep moving forward. The whistling was getting louder now, more complex, like a whole choir of voices weaving in and out of each other. But it wasn't coming from one direction anymore. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered behind me. I nodded. The sound was everywhere now. To our left, to our right, somewhere up in the canopy above us. And underneath it all, I could hear movement. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, things moving through the trees just out of sight. "They're hurting us," I said, not stopping. "Whatever's out there, they want us to go this way." Sarah's breathing was getting heavier. "Then maybe we should turn back." "Can't." I pointed ahead where the trail curved around a massive oak. "Lee's voice is coming from up there somewhere. I can hear him calling." And I could. Faint, but definitely Lee's voice saying "Dad" over and over. The sound was getting stronger as we climbed. Not the fake daddy from before, but Lee's actual voice, the one he used when he was really scared. Sarah caught up to me at the oak tree. "Tommy, what if it's another trick?" "It's not." I was sure of it now. The thing before was trying too hard. This is different. The whistling shifted around us. I could see shadows moving between the trees, keeping pace with us but staying just far enough back that I couldn't make out what they were. Every time I turned my head to look directly at one, it would slide behind a trunk or melt back into the darkness. "How many are there?" Sarah had her hand on her service weapon. "Too many to count." I kept walking. The trail was getting steeper now, winding up toward the ridge. "Don't draw that gun unless I tell you to. These things aren't afraid of bullets." Lee's voice called out again, clearer this time. He was definitely ahead of us, maybe a quarter mile up the mountain. But there was something else mixed in with his calls now. An echo that didn't quite match. "Dad, help me." Then, a second later, the same words, but in a slightly different tone, like someone was repeating what they'd just heard. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah." "They're learning his voice." My stomach dropped. "We need to move faster." The trail leveled out as we reached the ridge. Through the trees ahead, I could see the old fire tower. It had been abandoned for 30 years, just a metal skeleton rising up above the canopy. But there were lights around its base now. Not electric lights. Something that flickered and moved. "There," I pointed toward the tower. We crept closer, staying low and moving from tree to tree. The whistling had stopped completely now, which somehow made everything worse. The only sounds were our footsteps on the pine needles and Lee's voice calling for help. At the edge of the clearing, I stopped and looked through the branches. Lee was there, tied to one of the tower's metal support legs with what looked like climbing rope. He wasn't hurt that I could see, but his face was streaked with tears and dirt. He kept looking around the clearing like he was watching something move. Standing about 10 feet away from him was Timothy. I'd seen the thing wearing Timothy's face before, but this was different. This looked exactly like my best friend from 19 years ago. Same blonde hair, same build, same red flannel shirt he'd been wearing the night he disappeared. Even the way he stood with his weight shifted to his left foot. But when he spoke, I knew it wasn't really Timothy. "He's been asking for you." The voice was Timothy's, but underneath it I could hear other voices speaking the same words, like a recording played over itself multiple times. "Very polite boy. Says please and thank you." Lee looked up at the sound. "Dad? Dad, is that you?" I started to answer, but Sarah put her hand over my mouth and shook her head. The Timothy thing tilted its head toward our hiding spot. "Tommy Ramos. I know you're there. I can smell your grandfather's blood." I stepped out from behind the tree. No point hiding anymore. "Let him go," I said. Timothy smiled. It was the same smile I remembered from when we were kids, but it went on too long. After 19 years of waiting, I don't think so. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted." The thing walked in a slow circle around Lee, who tried to shrink away from it. "To complete the collection. Your family has something special, Tommy. Something in your blood that makes you more useful than the others." Sarah stepped out beside me, her gun drawn, and pointed at the Timothy thing. It laughed. The sound came from multiple throats, harmonizing with itself. "Go ahead, shoot me. See what happens." Then it pointed toward the trees surrounding the clearing. I looked where it was pointing and felt my legs go weak. There were people standing between the trunks. Dozens of them. At first glance they looked normal, but as my eyes adjusted I could see the wrongness in their faces. The too wide smiles. The eyes that reflected light like an animal's. I recognized some of them. Rebecca Martinez stood near a pine tree wearing the same hiking clothes she'd disappeared in 6 months ago, but her face was stretched wrong, like someone had tried to sculpt it from memory and gotten the proportions off. Next to her was Mr. Peterson, the old man who died of a heart attack 2 years back. Except his chest was moving up and down like he was breathing. And there, leaning against an oak tree with his arms crossed, was my father. He looked exactly like he had the day he died. Same work shirt, same tired expression, but when he saw me looking, he waved with fingers that bent in too many places. "Dad?" The word came out as a whisper. "Not anymore," the Timothy thing said. "But close enough. We're very good at copying what we collect." I saw Jake standing near the back of the group. He looked more solid than the others, more real. When our eyes met, he mouthed a single word. "Run." But I couldn't run, not with Lee tied to that tower. "What do you want from us?" I asked. "Your family has been following the rules for 60 years, the Timothy thing said. "Never alone, never at night, never answer the calls, never go out in the fog. Very disciplined, very careful, but the rules were never meant to keep you safe forever." It knelt down next to Lee and reached out to touch his hair. Lee flinched away. "They were meant to keep you intact until we were ready for you, to make sure you didn't get damaged or lost before we could complete the harvest." "Harvest?" "Your great-grandfather Jacob was the first one we tried to take, but we were young then, inexperienced. We took too much too fast, and he died before we could learn what made him special." The thing stood up and looked at me. "Your grandfather Jose was smarter. He made the rules to protect his family, but also to protect us, to make sure we could study you properly." My mouth went dry. Grandpa knew. He made a deal. Follow the rules, stay out of our way, and we'd leave the family alone until we figured out what we needed. Took us 6 decades to understand what makes your bloodline different from the others. Sarah kept her gun trained on the Timothy thing, but her hands were shaking. "What makes them different?" "They can see us. Really see us, not just the faces we wear. That boy there?" It pointed at Lee. He knew I wasn't really Timothy the moment I picked him up. Couldn't explain how he knew, but he knew. I thought about all the times Lee had acted strange around certain people in town. How he'd hide behind my legs when Mrs. Henderson came to the store, even though she'd always been nice to him. How he'd refused to go near the new mailman last month. You want him because he can see through your disguises. We want all of you. A breeding population. Raise your children to see us, and we can finally move beyond these mountains, spread to other places without worrying about being discovered. The sun was getting lower. I could see it through the trees, maybe an hour above the horizon. The shadows in the clearing were getting longer. "I have a proposition for you, Tommy." The Timothy thing walked closer to me. "Join us willingly. Let us take what we need from you without a fight, and your son gets to live, really live, not like the others. He'll grow up, have children of his own, pass on the gift. And if I refuse?" It gestured toward the figures in the trees. "Look at your Uncle Jake. See how empty his eyes are? That's what happens when we have to take someone by force. We get what we need, but we break them in the process." I looked at Jake again. He was shaking his head slightly, trying to warn me off. "Your choice, Tommy, but decide quickly. The sun's going down, and once it's fully dark, the rules stop working completely." The whistling started up again, soft at first, then building in volume and complexity. All around the clearing, the copied people began to move closer. Their movements were wrong, too fluid in some places and too jerky in others. I could hear Lee crying now, soft hiccuping sobs that cut through me like a knife. Sarah's finger was on the trigger. "Tommy, we need to do something." The Timothy thing smiled its too wide smile. "What's it going to be?" Above us, the sun touched the tree line. The shadows reached across the clearing like fingers, and I realized that everything my family had done for 3 generations had led to this moment. The rules hadn't been protection at all. They'd been preparation. I looked up at the Timothy thing standing next to Lee. The shadows were getting longer, but I had time for one more thing. "You want to know what makes us different?" I said. "It's not just that we can see you." The Timothy thing tilted its head. "What else could there be?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the wooden plaque. The one that had hung above our door for 60 years. The one my grandfather Jose carved with his own hands after his father Jacob died at Widow's Peak. "My grandfather taught me something the night before he died," I said. "About these rules, about what they really are." Sarah kept her gun trained on the Timothy thing, but I could see her watching me from the corner of her eye. Lee had stopped crying and was staring at the plaque in my hands. "The rules weren't just about avoiding you," I continued. "They were about preparing us for this day. The day when avoiding wouldn't be enough anymore." The Timothy thing's smile faltered just a little. "Preparing you for what?" I thought back to that last conversation with Jose. I'd been 17, and he'd called me out to the back porch after dinner. Mom was doing dishes inside, and Dad was watching television. Jose had sat in his old rocking chair and motioned for me to sit beside him. "Tommy," he'd said in that slow, careful way of his, "there's something about our family you need to know." I'd listened as he told me about Jacob, about the things in the mountains, about the deal he'd made to keep us safe. But then he'd said something else, something I hadn't understood until now. "The rules ain't just words, boy. They're older than that. Older than our family, older than these mountains. Jacob learned them before he died, passed them on to me in dreams. They're not just protection, they're power. Now, standing in this clearing with my son tied to a tower and monsters wearing dead faces surrounding us, I finally understood what he meant. I held up the plaque so the Timothy thing could see the carved words clearly. "These aren't just rules," I said. "They're a binding agreement, a contract written in the old language, before your kind learned to wear our faces." The Timothy thing took a step back. For the first time since we'd arrived, it looked uncertain. "You're lying," it said, but its voice had lost that confident tone. "Jose didn't make a deal with you to keep us safe until you were ready to harvest us," I said. "He made a deal to keep you contained until we were ready to stop you." I began to read the words carved into the wood, but I didn't read them the way Lee had that night on the porch. I read them the way Jose had taught me in that final lesson, with the weight and rhythm he'd shown me. "Never go into the mountains alone," I said, and my voice carried further than it should have in the thin mountain air. The Timothy thing stumbled backward. Around the clearing, the twisted figures began to shift and writhe like smoke and wind. Never go into the mountains at night, I continued. Sarah looked at me with wide eyes, but she didn't lower her gun. She could feel it too. The change in the air, the way the words seemed to echo from the mountains themselves. The Timothy thing pressed its hands to its ears. "Stop," it said, but its voice was weaker now, like it was coming from very far away. "If you hear your name called from the trees, don't answer," I said. The twisted figures around the clearing began to fade. I could see through them now, like they were made of morning mist. The one wearing my father's face looked at me with something that might have been gratitude before it dissolved completely. "If fog comes down, get inside and lock your doors," I finished. The Timothy thing let out a shriek that sounded like wind through broken trees. Its carefully constructed face began to melt and shift, revealing something underneath that hurt to look at directly. Then it collapsed in on itself like a deflated balloon and was gone. The other figures vanished one by one. Rebecca Martinez faded with a sigh that sounded almost relieved. Mr. Peterson dissolved into shadow. Even Jake, standing at the back of the group, gave me a small nod before disappearing into the gathering darkness. The clearing fell silent except for Lee's quiet sobs and the normal sounds of evening in the mountains: crickets, a distant owl, wind through pine needles. Sarah ran to Lee and began cutting through the rope with her pocket knife. Her hands were shaking, but she got him free in seconds. Lee threw his arms around her neck and buried his face in her shoulder. "Is it over?" Sarah asked. I looked around the clearing. The fire tower stood empty now, just rusted metal against the darkening sky. No movement in the trees, no eyes reflecting light that shouldn't be there. "For now," I said. We needed to get off this mountain. Full darkness was coming, and even with the Timothy thing gone, these weren't safe places to be after sunset. Some rules were still rules. Sarah carried Lee down the trail while I followed behind, watching our backs. The plaque felt warm in my hands, like it had absorbed heat from the words I'd spoken. I could understand now why Jose had carved it himself, why he'd insist